Development Services Permitting Department. Thank you, Tila. And I'm also expecting Rob Zazette. He has been our partner in crafting the Integrated Aquatic Vegetation Management Plan that brings us all here tonight. So I thought I'd just start with a really brief overview of why we're here. I apologize for the review for those of you I talked to ahead of time. But so in January, I reached out to the waterfront property owners, and we had a public meeting to gather your input for the vegetation management plan. Which is very lengthy, and we incorporated that input into here. But what I also heard at that meeting was that there was an interest in communication with the city, and there were some questions that we didn't answer at that meeting. So we wanted to have an opportunity for you to take a look at the final product. There's a lot of great information in here on how to deal with the management of plants. And then we also wanted you to have an opportunity to weigh in on how we can best communicate with you, what your communication needs are around aquatic weeds, and how we can do that. My position here is temporary, so I'm hoping to build some type of a communication plan that will live on beyond my time at the city, so that we don't just engage you and then drop you. And then really, we also heard just a general interest in hearing more about how to manage plants. What do they look like? What do you do with them? And we're just here to help facilitate that if we can do so. Interest was expressed at that time in banding together to jointly address aquatic weeds as homeowners as well, property owners. So we're hoping to address that tonight too. And here comes our scientist, Rob Zazette from Herrera Environmental Consultants. Is here for the technical portion and to answer your hard questions. So, because we're so small, just ask questions, and also because we're recording, I'm going to ask you to wait until we give you the mic so that we can pick up your question, so that it's understandable later as well. So in brief, we're just going to give you an overview of the lengthy document. We're going to talk about what weed management is planned. That's a question that we get a lot. What is the city going to do in the public spaces? So we'll briefly talk about that. Tila's going to walk you through what permits the city of Kenmore requires. And you'll find a lot about permits in the plan as well. This is accessible online too, so if you don't get a chance to look at it tonight, you can take a look there. We're going to talk about whether or not residents have an interest in forming a plant management association. It's like a lake association or a riverfront association that allows you to work together to implement some of the parts of the plan. And then that discussion that I talked about on communication between the city and you and what would be most useful for you. Did I introduce myself? I can't remember. I'm Janet Quinn. Sorry. First things first. Tila, Rob. And then we're hoping to leave some time for networking for you at the end, and Q&A. Rob is here to answer scientific questions, as I said. So basically, I mentioned in January we were gathering input on the Integrated Aquatic Vegetation Management Plan. IAVMP for short. And we submitted this in early March to the Department of Ecology because we received a grant from the Department of Ecology to do so. So they offered 75% of the funding, and the city is 25% of the funding to create this plan that gives you options on how to manage the aquatic weeds that we have found within our waters. So part of a couple of components of the plan were upstream outreach, because we are, as you all know, on the receiving end of some of the weeds from upriver. And then also reaching out to involve the public, and this is an effort to do that as well. So let's see. So since March, we have, do you mind if I sit down? Thanks. So Since March, we have been collecting edits. The Department of Ecology gave us back not a whole lot of edits. Herrera did a great job on crafting the plan. And so we've been working on edits from the Department of Ecology. We've had a few edits that were requested by residents. Ecology's biggest thing was to create tables instead of narrative for some of the plant management strategies. And then one of the things that I am new to aquatic weeds, so I am not an expert. And I've been schooled in the Brazilian Elodea, and now I find I have to remember that it's not really Elodea. It's confused with Elodea, which is a native plant. Rob can tell you more about that. So we're calling it Egeria on the advice of ecology. That's a trend that's developing in literature. So Elodea, Brazilian Egeria, same thing. Any questions so far? Are you all plant experts? Okay, cool. And then one resident suggested that there should be a plan for what to do with the weeds after you kill them. If you use herbicide or some other method, what to do with them after that. So that will be in the plan as well. Any questions on this part? Do you need more backstory or information from before? I know several of you were not at the January meeting, so I don't want to skip things that are important to you. So will you just commit to telling me if you have something that you need to know? Okay. All right, good.
What was the answer on the dead plants, by the way?
John asked what was the answer on the dead plants, and Rob will answer that a little bit later. Is that okay? Okay. Right, Rob? So a lot of questions that I get revolve around what is the city going to do about the weeds. And I'm just going to be frank and tell you that there's no money in the budget for dealing with the weeds. Our first step for dealing with them was this, because with this we have the opportunity to apply for grant funding opportunities that are available now. With this, were not available before we had this, so it's kind of the first step in the process. We did apply herbicide. We hired a company to apply herbicide last year to treat Elodea and Egeria and milfoil in public areas, so Log Boom Park, Rhododendron Park, Squires Landing, and the mouth of the river just past the 68th Avenue Bridge. And the city is thinking, unless we get council gives us input otherwise, the city is thinking that we'll probably do something similar, some management plan every other year. Because as I said, it's not currently in the budget, and there's never enough money to do everything you want to do. So. Let's see, we are, in the letter I said to you that we were going to be presenting this plan to council for their input and discussion on the 15th, but that meeting was canceled, so it's actually going to be the 22nd. So if you have an interest in hearing council's discussion on it, that will be on May 22nd. Okay. So as I said before in January, but I haven't said to you, the city's focus is on the public areas. So the areas that I mentioned would be the areas that the city would be focusing on and paying attention to. Yes. Do you want to? We're gonna wait and give you the mic. John, you got it. One pass, and the next time we're gonna make you use the mic.
My name is Pat Park. I live in the Arrowhead area. And what I'm hearing is that, again, we're going to be dumped out there to have our own decisions as to what we want to do out in the waterfront. And I moved in 94, I believe. We didn't have any weeds then or anything going on. And over the last say 5 or 6 years, it's gotten worse every single year. A couple years ago, we were we were told that we could pull the weeds, and we did. But then we found out you don't do that because they just drop and replant themselves. So I guess what I'm concerned about is that every year we have this problem, and now we're going to be stuck out there again as owners of property. We're paying enormous amounts of taxes. And, I just get to the point where I just say, tell us what we need to be doing to fix it. And then maybe even our Arrowhead area can get together. But you always worry about the people that don't give a darn and don't even worry about it. And so the questions I have is, why can't we get some more help from the government? I mean, we are paying a lot of money for taxes, and it's just frustrating to me. And now I'm hearing don't pull them, so now we're going to have to either kill them with something, which is illegal, I guess, until you have a permit. So my question starts.
True.
We get a permit.
So Tila's going to give an overview on the permits a little bit later, and we're going to talk about whether or not you as residents want to form a plant management association. But one thing I would be remiss not to say is that if you look at your tax bill, the portion that goes to the city is actually very small, and it's growing at a smaller rate than the expenses are growing. So we try to be really responsible with your tax dollars, and it would be remiss of me not to just mention that. But I hear what you're saying, that you want to know what to do, and we will get into that a little bit later.
But can I make a quick comment about what to do? Aquatechnics is the company that treated the city's sites last year. They also treated part of the waterfront along Arrowhead towards Inglewood. I don't know whether they made it all the way to your house or not, Pat, but yeah, but I've been talking to Aquatechnics, and they hold a permit to do it this year. So they can do that. They hold a permit, and Terry McNabb, the guy that runs Aquatechnics, said that he would be getting a mailer out to all of the invitees to this meeting. That mailing is going out tomorrow. So that's an opportunity for us to get something done.
So John made a public request for the mailing list, and what I'm hearing is that you shared it with Aquatechnics, which should make it easy for him to reach out to you. There are other companies, and that might be one of the things that you want to talk about as if you decide to form a group. There are other things besides herbicide that you can do as well that are in the management plan. So we'll talk a little bit about that later.
There is one other company that contacted me. They do mechanical removal. And I don't know whether we want to do that or not because of the obvious limitations to doing that. But it is an option if you're averse to chemicals. But the one other point I wanted to make is that if we do indeed have an association, that entity would be able to apply for grants to treat weeds. And that has happened around the state quite a bit, actually. And then the money goes through these little lake associations.
Yeah, I hope to answer some of your questions a little bit later, and if I don't, please ask them again and make sure that I'm addressing your concerns. So, let's see. So next up is Tila. She's going to talk about permits. I'll just turn it over to her.
Hello. So, like she said, my name is Tila Whiteman, and I'm the permit specialist for the Development Services Department. So we handle all land use applications and building permits in the city. I recognize a few faces. I don't know if you stopped by the permit counter before. So I am not a planner by training, but I do see all the paperwork that comes through City Hall for permits. So my perspective is more from the paperwork side. if you want to get into really nitty-gritty details about the Shoreline Management Act, I can forward you to the planner, and she can help you with that. So a shoreline substantial development permit is required for if you were to create a group, and I don't know, maybe a few groups or just one group, and you decided you were going to do X, Y, and Z every year in certain places in the city. So basically, one of the jokes the planner makes all the time is it's always required unless it's not. So this is basically an exemption request to the city that it's not something like a shoreline substantial development permit, not an exception. So we, the Development Services Department, would look at your documents and basically exempt you from applicable state and local codes regarding these critical areas. So the point of the review is to make sure that we avoid any potential impacts to critical areas and that we restore or rehabilitate the critical areas before the project is complete. So specifically, we're looking at Shoreline Management Act, the WAC, our own municipal code. And I have these, and you guys can get a copy if you like. It's kind of just an overview of how to do everything. At this point, I don't know if you're to that point or not. But so basically just pretty typical permit application forms, project narrative documents, site plans, and then a major part of the exemption is that you request an exemption based on criteria in the WAC and the municipal code. So I can show you that really quick. So basically, it's a substantial development permit or it's not. So this is the WAC, and it's quite lengthy. Exactly. So unfortunately, the burden of proof is on the applicant. As a department, we can generally tell you what not to do, which is, see item number, 3B, we are exempt because that's not what we're looking for. I have an example narrative that really is pretty lengthy. What are your goals as a group? How will you remove these? How you follow the IAVMP? Things like that was what we're looking for. And the yeah, so
Not us, but you do it talking to us.
it. In my experience, I tell this to anybody who asks about, if I hire a contractor, they'll just take care of this for me. So the only thing that I worry about when people say that is you're paying for their time to do this. And I would be happy to work with anybody if you wanted to try to do this yourself so that you didn't have to pay the contractor's time. I think there's a question in the back.
In this particular case, Aquatechnics already has the permit to treat the shoreline.
Well, so, go ahead. Do you mind if we back up? I'm going to ask Rob to come and just talk to you in general about permits overall. Tila's talking to you about what the city requires in terms of a permit, but I think it would be easier if you had sort of the umbrella view first. Rob, I'm going to make you repeat that in the mic, because it is being recorded tonight, so that everybody can hear and understand. Here.
Can I use your mic? So there's two permits, and that's confusion. Is the primary permit that the applicator gets or the harvester operator gets for their client is through the State Department of Ecology, the Aquatic Weed Management Permit. And I would like to back up and say with an IAVMP, it's much easier to get that permit now. So that's a much easier process. He doesn't have to do a discharge management plan. He just slaps the IAVMP in there, and then just fills in a couple of rows, and it's that easy. It's an easy process. I fill them out all the time.
They had the permit last year.
Yes. And then once they got the permit, too, by the way, all he's got to do is pay a fee, I forget how much it is, to
About
extend it. It's good for 5 years.
500 a year.
And so that's the state ecology permit. This is the city permit, or that was the shoreline development permit by the city.
Yes, so there is no expiration date on a shoreline substantial development exemption. As long as the project stays the same. The scope of the work is exactly the same. If you just want to follow that every year for 10 years, good for you.
And so,
And Aquatechnics has one of those already, and that's public information that we can get.
so they got a permit to do the treatment last year.
No,
Exemption.
Aquatechnics does not have a City of Kenmore permit. They have a Department of Ecology permit, and I think that's where some of the confusion comes in. They have what's called an NPDES. Rob's going to tell you what that means.
Right, that's the question.
did.
Yes, they have that permit, but did they got a
Did they,
substantial exemption
Tila,
last
did they
year?
come through?
To do Kenmore property, public property, they have to get a permit to do public property.
Yeah, I would
as well.
imagine so. I don't
So-
know off the top of my
So
head, but
you could get that permit
Yeah.
and copy it. I mean, that's the same thing. That's the whole point.
Yeah, just
is you
public
get
record
that,
requests.
and you just specify whatever number they're supposed to refer to. It's already there. You just have to, although it's not already there. That specified a certain area that would be treated. You would specify what you're planning to do. But as far as all the regulatory stuff,
How's it different than last year? When they did my waterfront?
well, that's a good question. So you just said if you get an exemption, it's good forever. So if they got an exemption for last year, they have an exemption forever.
So
It's the
in the
same
WAC, the code says that the project scope and work plan remain unchanged. So I would, yeah, I mean, probably before you start the work, say, does my work fall under this? It may be that it is so specific to that company that you can't just take it and use it, but it would be up to the planner to review that. And that's certainly a possibility to look into.
But they are planning to do the same thing. So do they have to do anything? You say now they have the permit, it's good, they're not changing anything. If they change something, then they apply for another exemption? That's what I understand you're saying. So if they're not going to change something, they don't have to apply for a second exemption. Oh, if you decide to go harvesting, that would be different than what...
But as long as we're spraying,
Yeah, that's what I said. No, and you
I
can
mean,
use the
yeah.
same herbicides too.
Pretty specific, though, location, methods, stuff like that, we'd want to at least be notified.
Oh, so there's a notification process.
Just to say, hey, Tila, does this apply? And I'll say yes or no.
And keep in mind that that's a different permit than so the City of Kenmore is one permit, and then the Department of Ecology is the permit that is an annual renewal. It automatically renews. Terry McNabb, Aquatechnics, pays for it every year unless he notifies Ecology that he's not going to be utilizing it. So,
And if you hire a different applicator, they have their own permit. It's specific to the applicator.
does that make sense?
Actually, no. I've gotten permits, and you can add an applicator to an existing permit. Actually, it's complicated, but you can.
But you don't need to.
No, I know. Yeah, I'm not saying you don't need to. I'm just trying to give you.
So far, it seems like we don't really have anything that we need to do as far as permits go. Is that right?
I mean, at this point, it's kind of nice because you can see what they've requested and build your plan around that. If you look at what they've submitted and you decide, ooh, that doesn't really work for us, we don't imagine this is possible, then it would change. So that's kind of the question for you at the moment.
And we will confirm whether Aquatechnics has indeed gotten a permit through the City of Kenmore, but I would imagine that they have. But we'll get back to you on that.
you're not really interested in, is there a possibility even though it doesn't really interest me, is it a possibility that we could do this ourselves as far as, I mean, I've been through the SSDX process. It's not that hard once you can decipher that document and work out which numbers to choose. And as I said, if someone's already done it, you do a public record request, see what they wrote, copy, paste, submit your $279 plus 3%. Is that right? And then, so the Department of Ecology one is $500 a year by the sound of it. Is there anything else to stop us from homeowners? Because you can buy dicot. Can we do it ourselves or not? Or you have to have an applicator do it? Okay.
You have to have a license.
Okay. That kills that idea.
But there's nothing stopping you from buying a weed rake and raking the weeds out of our property. I'd like to. It's not bad. That was a bad rumor you heard from somebody. It's okay to rake the weeds out of the lake. Read the plan. Sure. And the pieces are breaking off all over the lake and replanting all over the lake. Your little pieces are not going to spread it any faster. Yeah.
So I will say that Department of Ecology and Rob have a difference of opinion on that particular issue.
I just wondered if someone were to do a lot of raking on their property and just released what they raked up, it's going to affect boaters and it's going to affect swimmers. Is there any kind of repercussion legally for that, or that's A-okay?
Anything you do with the weeds requires a permit. So if you are removing weeds from your property through raking, it requires either the exemption or the permit, because it is based on the Shoreline Act, the Management Act, and local governments. And Rob is going to tell you if I'm
actually, there's a third permit I forgot to tell you about.
But local governments have been, if you read the Shoreline Management Act of 1971, you'll see that they have tasked local governments with this. We didn't just come up with this on our own. It's something that we have been required to do.
The third permit is the hydraulic project approval permit, and that's issued by the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife. It applies to all the physical methods. The chemical methods is the ecology. They cover the chemical. Wildlife covers the physical. The HPA permit is actually a pamphlet. It's it's online. You read the pamphlet, and you swear to somebody that you're going to follow those rules, and you don't have to apply for anything. You just have to follow the rules. That's essentially their permit process. And raking follows under that. Pardon?
So that's for raking, but we still need the SSDX?
Yes, for everything. Yep.
And to follow up on the question that I heard, and I'm not sure we answered directly, yes, the plants do propagate through autofragmentation, and that's what the concern is.
Yes, they fragment themselves. The boat motors, propellers fragment. Fragmentation's happening all over the place. But yes, you don't want to go out there and cut. I'm not actually promoting cutting. I'm promoting raking. Raking is a process of dragging the weeds to shore or into a boat. You remove all those plants that would otherwise sit there all year and send off their fragments that already have roots attached to them, by the way. And when they fragment themselves, they're much more viable than if you broke off a piece. And so it's not going to spread the weeds as long as you remove them from the lake. It's a very effective process. It's laborious, of course, but it does work and it doesn't spread them.
And you dispose of them?
However you like. They're not an invasive species that you have to get an invasive species transport permit, like if it was a mud snail or a New Zealand mud snail or something. Compost. They compost great. They're really great in the compost. They be careful, though. They'll get really hot if they're very high energy. But I compost them all the time, and they're very, very good for compost. They're worm bins. They're really good for worm bins. They really grow worms really well.
And are you talking specifically about milfoil and
any of the plants?
Agarya, but
yeah.
Any of them?
The Agarya is a little slower to decompose. Water lilies even slower, but it all composts.
So part of the management plan, there are actually detailed best management practices in the appendixes of the plan that tell you exactly what to do with every plant, and it's different for each of the plants. So you can pick up one of the, Ben Peterson from King County left me his cards, and he's a noxious weed specialist for King County, and he left me a lot of the brochures, and you're welcome to take one of those. They're pretty good about giving you information on what needs to be done. But it's also in the plan, which is, so take a look at the appendices, and you'll get really good detailed information on what each plant requires.
And what that did was just that. This plan is specific to this site, these types of plants that we saw. By the way, we surveyed them all, and we know, at least last year, what was going on. And but what I would say is we created a short list. So there's a lot more methods, and we do describe them in the appendix, but we came down and said, okay, what are the most cost-effective physical removal methods and chemical removal methods? What are the best herbicides? What are the best physical removal methods for this situation and for these plants? And there are other methods out there that are available, but this plan focuses on those that are recommended for your problem.
Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Tila.
I don't know if I had much else to add.
What's the cost?
The cost is, based on our current fee schedule, $292.95.
And that's a lifetime if you
use a check.
don't change your method.
Exactly. One-time fee.
I don't like the word lifetime, especially since we're recording this session. It is not an annual permit. It is, there may be regulations that change in the future. There may be other things externally that change. So I don't like to use the word lifetime just for practical reasons. Yeah, it's a little bit infinite.
It doesn't seem like you've made a case that the waterfront residents need one of these permits, because the permit presumably must reside with the applicator, the contractor, and it already is there since he did it last year. Am I not understanding this correctly?
So I'm going to read you, Samantha Loyak, when she and I were talking about this, I'm going to read you her answer to my question of do we need a shoreline permit or a shoreline exemption permit from the city of Kenmore. But I want to, John, you're talking about herbicide removal alone. And the IABMP is not just talking about herbicide removal, it's talking about other methods of removal as well. So so what Terry has the permit for is herbicide treatment.
Oh, okay, so if I understand this correctly, if what we want to do is use the the permits that the contractor already has, then we don't need to reapply for a new permit, since we're sticking with the plan that's already permitted. If we wanted to do something different, for example, go buy a mechanical harvester, then we probably would need a different permit. Is that correct?
Let me read you her answer. She says,
Well, they did the job last year.
so she says a shoreline substantial development permit exemption, or shoreline exemption for short, application will be required prior to any work which is defined as development. That's not an automatic understanding, I think. But so when they say development, they're talking about any work. Any that's taking place. A permit is not required for the plan itself for the IABMP, but neighborhood groups will be required to obtain a shoreline exemption permit prior to starting work. So that's if it's different than if you contract with somebody who already has a permit and they've gone through the proper permitting process with the City of Kenmore, with Ecology, with Department of Fish and Wildlife, then you're not going to need to go and apply for your own. If you are doing different work that is recommended in the plan, like bottom barriers or mechanical, other methods of removal or management, then you need a permit. So anything that is not already permitted with all of those would require a permit. She says, and we have sample forms, so we're happy to, and Tila's happy to share with you a link to the completed. She took the time to complete forms so that you can see what they look like as samples. So it might not answer all of your questions, but it really is going to go a long ways towards answering them, I think. Okay?
So I think still the question right now is if that contractor, I forgot their name, if they have an SSDX, Aquatechnics, what that applies to. And certainly if you decide to use them as a contractor and they are just going to follow their own plan, that you wouldn't need to do anything extra beyond that.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, they were hired last year by the city of Kenmore, so I presume that they went through all the hoops.
We'll find out. We'll find out and get back. I would.
I haven't been a permit specialist for all that long, so we'll give them the benefit of the doubt right now.
Okay. Did you want to say more? No. Okay. So the idea of a plant management association came again out of that meeting in January, where I was just thinking about how can we facilitate you working together to attack the weeds. Not everybody is comfortable with herbicides, so if you have different ideas or if you want to try a different method, there are methods in the plan that are suggested. And I'll just clarify what it is. So Plant Management Association is just another way of saying a lake association, but since we have river residents and lake residents, it seemed logical to call it something different that was what it was about, which is managing the plants. It's a volunteer organization. It's formed by, run by, everything done by you as residents. The city, AKA me, is happy to facilitate the formation of it if we can be of assistance to you and you have a strong desire to do it and are willing to commit to doing it, then we're happy to help you in the paperwork and the formation of it. But this is really not something that is city dictated or city driven. This is really something that you as residents might decide that it's going to be worth it for you to be able to talk to one another, to band together to apply for grants, to work together to get rates for contracting services, just the advantages of an association as opposed to an individual. So, yeah, you can read that as well as I. So I don't. My question is, this is just an idea, and my question is there an interest in doing that?
What's the advantage of forming a committee versus having him just send around a form and Aquatechnic and say, okay, how many are going to sign on the dotted line?
Is there anybody in the room that is not interested in herbicides, that is interested in a different method of treatment? Okay, then. Matt?
Yeah, I'm interested in maybe. We didn't have much success last year with the Aquatechnics treatment. We only had it done once, but the weeds grew back pretty quick. But I'm willing to try it again for another year or two to see how it goes. But, I mean, if it doesn't work, then I'll be open to looking at other avenues, whether it's harvesting. I know that's what Lake Sammamish does. And they've been at that for a number of years, so that maybe they know some things that we don't of why they're harvesting. I know it's a lot more expensive to do that, but by the turnout tonight, it's probably baby steps to start with, and Aquatechnics is the easy baby steps probably for this year and the following years. And then sort of, the Lake Association thing would be probably a requirement to get more people together to do something more expensive like harvesting down the road.
Yeah, the problem with the herbicides in this water body is they're only given a very narrow window to apply, the last 2 weeks of July. And so they can't come in early and they can't go later. And so the effectiveness of herbicides are much reduced by that fish window restriction. Harvesting doesn't have that restriction, and that way you can get a longer term control, and there's an advantage of it that way. And let me back up though. There's different levels of organizations. There's a volunteer organization, which you already are. You are an organization, but you are just one community. And there are potential advantages of expanding to the larger community to potentially combine forces to treat a larger area. And I don't know that it's necessarily a cost savings, but it is an organizational, there may be organizational benefits for getting one contractor to do multiple beneficial use areas. As you know, we wrote them in the plan, and we sort of developed beneficial use areas by residential and public and commercial properties, and to potentially form, essentially expand an existing volunteer. But the next level is, and to apply for funding, though, you have to be a 501(c) entity, which I kind of doubt you are. You're just yeah. So that's something to know. You don't have the option without that to seek funding. So that would be the next level, is to take your volunteer organization to a nonprofit, to become a nonprofit state, federal nonprofit organization. And then the next level is to form a taxing district, a special taxing district, where then people pay an annual fee that goes into a pool. The board or the community, however it's structured, decides how to spend that every year or not. And obviously, and there's plenty of those are lake management districts or special districts, that kind of thing. I work with one on Black Lake in Thurston County that the lake management district has to be sponsored by an agency, and in this case it would probably be King County, because I don't think the city is interested in that. And I formed one in King County, and it was a very challenging thing. It was King County's first lake. I don't think you want a lake management district, but I think a special district is if you're interested in getting more organized into a tax-based system, if you have a high level of interest, that's what it requires. And to do that, everybody has to vote. You have to get a percentage of the residents in the property zone to vote for that district, and if you don't get that, then you fail. And so that's the different levels of the association.
And I will tell you, the city is not talking about that. So I don't want you to walk away from here thinking, oh, more taxes. No, we are not talking about that. We're here to see whether or not you want to form that volunteer management association. I'm not seeing interest in it, so I'm going to just leave it at that. If there's a time in the future that you want to talk about that, I think that's something that you can get together and talk about. I think one of the advantages is that it's, and I don't care whether you do or don't. It is not there's no push to get you to do it. You understand that, but I like to provide as much information as possible. And I think one of the advantages is that you can explore what contractors there are, have them come and present to you. I just think as a group you have maybe a bigger opportunity to hear from more people than you do as individuals. Yeah. Or not duplicate efforts, maybe that's a better way to put it.
If I could just say a word or two about, let me call it a very loosely structured association that was primarily based on information sharing. If there were a website that could be maintained that would have information regarding, for example, the availability of contractors and information that related to resources that can be used on the web for education, for example, to find out what weeds are, what you can do about them, and other water quality issues. And such a site could also be used for information regarding algae, which is becoming it wasn't a topic of the IAVMP, but it certainly is a topic that the people along the lake are concerned about, because we have had over the last 2 years, outbreaks of toxic algae in the lake, and also an increasing amount of filamentous green algae, the big floating mats that are here and that were originally here along the slough and now have gone down the lake and are laying on the bottom of the lake down there in mats. And they grow, they essentially cover the milfoil and what we used to call elodia, the pondweed. It looks like this massive ball of green fur in the lake, but it hasn't been a part of the IAVMP study, and we don't have a plan for that. But it's becoming a bigger and bigger problem. But these two types of algae are issues that people want to know about, want to understand. They want to understand whether they're dangerous, and they want to. And a site could provide an opportunity for a very quick heads up on what is going on with the lake. For example, if algae is sighted, someone could simply post a picture of it and say, "What is this?" Just as a communication device, I think that the simplest form of association might be pretty helpful.
So for those of you who haven't been in the room when we've talked about this before, there are two separate funding mechanisms for water quality, which is what the algae falls under, and aquatic weeds, which is what the management plan is about. So I hear you. I understand that residents, they're interconnected. It's hard to separate them except for funding. But this is a perfect segue into the next topic of conversation, which is what communication is useful for you, and what would you like to see on the city website?
Along the lines with the algae, you've got people with their dogs and stuff walking along St. Edward State Park, right along the waterfront, and their dogs are in the water and stuff. And with these, during the winter or spring, that we've had these people coming from up above, down on Arrowhead Point. John always posts when we have algae, and to keep our dogs off, animals out of the water. And but the people that are walking the state park don't.
So in the plan, because we recognize it is interconnected, there is a little section on water quality, and Rob has, do you want to talk about that a little bit? There are some stations that, is it King County that manages those?
Yeah, but those are just general lake quality. King County has the best website in the state and beyond for this information. We were very fortunate, and they have support services to answer site-specific questions for you. I strongly encourage you to get connected with King County's lake water quality and their aquatic weeds. It's really a fabulous website. What you're concerned about, and you should be, is the toxic algae, and they monitor it routinely, and the lake is going through an evolution, degraded and increase in toxic algae production. It's going to only get worse. That's what's going on. The lake has eutrophied, and we're going back to the days before they diverted the sewage out of it is what's happening, and those nutrients have been building up, and the blue-green algae, the toxic algae, are becoming more and more of a problem. And in the wintertime, too, it's happening, but it's they work directly with the Department of Ecology, who runs the toxic algae program. So that the other website that you need to look at is Washington Ecology's toxic algae website. They post on that website what lakes are closed, which lakes have warnings. All that stuff is there. And I will tell you, Lake Washington is very well monitored. It is a big lake.
They do a fantastic job. Northwest Toxic Algae .org is the website. They do a fantastic job, but it's always 2 weeks late. And so what I was talking about is, what if somebody sees something, and what if I'm out?
That's who you call King County.
Yeah, I know, but I'm saying that if we, Kenmore, had a site that people here are used to using, we can tell people what's out there today.
So this might be a silly idea, but I know of a few apps and or Facebook would be excellent ways to stay in touch. Certainly with the Nextdoor app, I have that in my neighborhood. You can pin certain things, so if you wanted to have the King County information up at the top, and then you could all talk about certain things you see, and it would be like real time, very quickly. It's kind of silly, but
No, and that's good. And in fact, Northwest Toxicology now has an app for your phone, so you can report toxicology things. Did you get that? Good, because I don't have it yet, but I've been meaning to get it. But I agree with you. Is though that it's all about people. Where do they go to get information? You want that information where people go, and if everybody's going to the city's website, the city could easily put links to the ecology website and King County's website, and that's exactly what you're saying. That's the recommendation, and Janet left the room, but we'll make sure we voice that again when she gets back, is for the city to provide those links for updated information. Janet, we've came up with a whole plan while you're gone.
Oh, okay.
Communication plan.
That might have been what Jamie was looking for. No.
It's John, right? Yeah, John came up with a great idea. It says, yes, he recognizes all the great information that King County and the Department of Ecology have all about algae and plants, and those websites have that information. But Joe Public is not aware of that, and that person is more familiar with going to the city to look for information. And if the city could add a page that would help direct where to find more information about these subject matters, is what is being suggested here. Is that would be a very
No, will you make that
yes
one?
page with links saying, here, if you got an algae problem, go here. You got a weed problem, go here. Yeah.
Northwest Toxicology, although it's great, you can go in there and you can look up Lake Washington, and it will show you the Lake Washington toxic events. Then you drill down further and look at the details on it. It may or may not say anything like Kenmore or Log Boom or Arrowhead, but just Lake Washington, this thing is 25 miles long.
No, and I like your previous point is it's late and it doesn't cover the entire lake. And what's most important is people get educated that if you see scum, you get out. You don't go in scum. You don't let your dogs go in scum. Whether you don't wait for somebody to have tested it, sampled it, and tested it, and get those results after it's already floated away.
So this is the city's website. It's under major projects and integrated IAVMP. And this is all information that was useful when we were developing the plan, but now that it is submitted to ecology, most of this doesn't need to stay. So what I'm hearing is that you would prefer to have a link to some of these external websites from the city website that would give you information on some of the topics that are of interest to you. Is that what I'm hearing? Yes. Okay. So, and if you look at your agenda, I put, it's on one of the slides as well, but I put a list of, you can ignore the first one because right now you're not interested in a Plant Management Association, but the second one, there's the Department of Ecology, there's King County Noxious Weeds, there's a King County Lake Stewardship Program, which if you do get to the point where you're interested in an association, they have a department that assists with that. We could. So we'll figure out where we're going to put it. That's not my department, but we'll figure out a logical place to put it. And what other information then did I miss that?
Could we build a whole page instead of just a separate? It would be nice, I think, to have a way to
It will not be. And I probably shouldn't make it that definitive, but everybody in the city is doing about 5 different things, and this is working because I am temporary and I've been here to manage this project, but it's time consuming. It is, and I don't want to commit the city to something that they have neither the funding nor the staffing to do in the future, but I want to build something that's going to be useful for you. So a place that you can go to get information, or a place to go to external links that you will find useful. But I don't want to come up with the info on my own. That's what I'm asking you to give me input on. A place that you can go for information. Yep. There is a city system already set up. It's called CARS, isn't it? Do you know where it is on the website?
Yeah, we have, it's called Citizen Action Requests. Yeah, I don't know if it would fit with what you're asking. I'm still plugging for Facebook. That's.
I think you're right. Something like Facebook or WordPress or Nextdoor, or I would say either Facebook or WordPress or Nextdoor or one of those social sites. That they have to be moderated in some way. Otherwise, you get 75 posts about the dog next door is barking.
So nextdoor.com is useful. I mean, that's one way that you can communicate with your neighbors. I think that's one vehicle. The city does have a Facebook page. It's typically to make people aware of events and things that the city is engaged in, and to kind of push information out. I don't know that we really have an interactive mechanism, and I don't know that we have the staffing for it. That's a pretty labor-intensive
I understand.
proposition.
It's hard. It would take. I think it'd take some dedicated volunteers to do anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it, I'm just putting it out there as an issue that this is something that has just cropped up in the last several years. Is these water quality issues that come and go, and they're potentially hazardous to life.
Mm-hmm. So the city's interest in general is fish habitat, and public access to the waterfront is a high priority for council. I guess I'll just again say on the 22nd we'll be presenting the IABMP and hearing council's comments on it, and that might be of interest to you as well at the meeting that night.
I think that's a great idea.
Oh, thank you. No, I just was thinking if I as someone who doesn't use a computer, but I don't like it. But if I were looking, look, I got this stuff in my leg. What is this? I go to the hospital or the Kenmore site, and I look on there and say, where can I put this? Then I saw something I don't like.
Let me investigate whether King County has something like that. I don't know that that's something that I couldn't commit to, in all honesty, I couldn't commit the city to.
Yeah, King County does it, and I think that would be great for you to talk to them about if they can notify you if there's a toxic event in the city of Kenmore, and then you can post it. I don't think it can happen automatically, but I don't know. I'm not an IT guy, but they do. They regularly post whatever. You go right to their main page, and it's right there in red. This lake's closed. This lake's, and it's on their main page at the main link, and I could see them offering to communicate that.
To push it out to the city of Kenmore.
To push it out to the city of Kenmore.
This lake's not going to get This lake is never going to get closed. But there are spots on this lake that have been hazardous and have been posted. Beaches have been closed on this lake. We have closed beaches here.
You sent in tests. You sent in samples.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they come up that.
Yeah, and they have told me to put up my beach closed signs, and I've done that.
They don't do it. And they don't post that information on the King County website.
They do.
They do.
They do.
Oh, okay.
They do. And this. They're never going to close this lake.
Oh, the whole lake, yeah. So, John, I want to honor everybody else as well, and I want to make sure that I have answered the questions that you came here with, and have I captured the information that you wanted to convey to me, to us? Did you have a question?
So basically, if a weed that's identified in here as being invasive, if it's on your property, if it's submerged, you can't pull it out. And you need to have a permit to do anything on your property. So even if you're willing to do work to get rid of an invasive weed, you are prohibited from doing it without spending $293 or something.
So that is what the Shoreline Management Act of 1971 tells us, right? I mean, that's if you want to do work. Rob, you want to answer this?
No, I don't. That permit is interpretable, and this is the city's interpreted it as you've heard it today, and not everybody interprets it that way. I would see, though, that maybe so that you and somebody else, maybe someone could pay that fee for the whole area to allow raking area-wide. That might be a useful exercise.
So we could,
And
so we can pay the $279 and say it's for or it's $279 plus 3%, right? That's where the $292 is coming from, right? And we can just put in that application. It's for these addresses and list every single address in the city of Kenmore that's on lakefront and riverfront. And if some nice Samaritan fronted up with $279, it would cover everyone, right? Then we'd be good for not infinity, but
I believe
well,
so.
do you want to?
I mean, we'd review it, but it can be really blanket.
Right.
It can be pretty broad. I mean, we still have to review it. So, but I think that was kind of my idea when I was creating this little cheat sheet, was that that's what you wanted to do. So.
right. And then if it's pulling or raking of weeds, then it's only under Department of Wildlife, which means you just swear to someone that you read a white pamphlet that you downloaded and you're done.
And again, the permit exemption would be, correct me if I'm wrong, things that are in the methods that are established in the IAVMP. Is that?
Yeah, so I can give this to you too. In the project narrative, you would just describe how you're complying with the IAVMP. So, it might just be, we will use best management practices according to blah, blah, blah.
Because basically this document has done the hard work, hopefully, for many of you, for all of you, and will be a tool for you to use into the future. So that's the goal anyway. Did I answer you, Heather? Is that, yeah? Okay. Or did Tila answer you?
What about, could the city get the permit for the community for raking to allow individual raking of plants from properties rather than it coming from an individual? Because, I mean, obviously, you have to get a permit. Mm-hmm. The city has to get a permit to manage plants in public places from themselves.
Yeah. The short answer is no. There is no funding in the budget for any of this stuff. So the permit department has a process, and the way that they put that process in place is to review the permits that you apply for, and that, I mean, it is, it's an interesting question. The answer has been no to date.
Okay.
I guess I will put it that way.
I'll chip in a few bucks for you guys.
Yeah. Is there, I want to be sure to leave plenty of time for you to talk with one another if that's what you want to do, but I also want to make sure that we've answered your questions and that you feel like you've communicated what you want to communicate. What I heard you want on the website is links to these external sites that might give you information on how to deal with the plants. Is that correct?
And the algae.
And while I was out of the room, you
And the
had-
toxic algae is
And the
is
toxic
real
algae.
concern.
So I will check with King County and see how they manage that, whether they push that out to cities, and whether that could be on the website as well. Is it King County that manages the water testing stations?
Yes, they have their routine monitoring stations in the lake and the river, and they're just testing water quality. That's the toxic algae is separate from that. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So again, they're compartmentalized in the way that they think about these things or they work on these things. But I don't have anything else. On the agenda, there was a list of the websites that I will also put a link to on our website. I can't tell you when exactly this website will change, but over the next month or so, you should see some useful information. What is it? May? Yeah, I'll work to get that up as soon as possible. But it's involves somebody else, and I can't commit somebody else's time. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I think someone contacted us last year. We were in the Ken along the beach down here near Arrowhead Point. And will they get in touch with the homeowners to offer this service? And does it make any sense if you have neighbors that we swam and use the beach, but most of our neighbors don't?
So because we're recording and the recording didn't pick up any of that, I'll just recap. But I'll say that Aquatechnics is one company that provides this service. The city is not in a position to recommend one over another. They are the company that we used last year, and John provided the waterfront property owner list that I used to mail to you. To Aquatechnics. So from what I just heard John say, he will be reaching out to residents. Terry McNabb of Aquatechnics will be reaching out to residents. Herrera, I will just say Herrera has been a great partner in building the IAVMP. They are specifically prohibited under the terms of the grant funding from doing work based on the IAVMP that is funded by the state. So that's the limitation that's in the grant. But Herrera is another company.
No, we don't do herbicide treatments. There really is only one other firm. We do diver hand pulling, though, if you want to spend a little bit.
Other types of
we get the
management,
roots.
yeah.
Anyway, there's one other firm. There's a couple other firms, but there's really only one other with the experience that Terry has. And it's Aquatics Northwest, and they would be a competitive person. I recommend that you interview both of them. I mean, you like Terry, you've worked with Terry, that's fine. Some people don't, and they like the other guy. And there's just two guys that have been doing it. They know their stuff. They know there's a couple other newer guys in the business that might be okay. I'm just not that familiar with them. No, Terry's out of Bellingham. Oh, that's the new one I don't know about. Yeah, I can't remember their name. And so there are others, potentially. And in fact, the Department of Ecology has on their website all the licensed applicators, and their contact information is available on the Department of Ecology's Aquatic Weed Management
And I
website.
will, I'll try to put a link on our website to that, so.
Does the permit go with the job or with the contractor? So
I mentioned that earlier. It is with the contractor. The permit is issued to an individual. It can be an entity. The city could apply for a permit, and then for a contractor to be named later. I don't think that Doug Dorling can use Terry McNabb's permit, though. I don't think it works that way. So I don't think one of his competitors can. No, I know that. That would be. So the answer basically is yes. The permit goes with the applicator. Yes. I'm talking ecology department, yes.
It depends on the
I mean,
treatment.
if it said in there, which I would assume the contractor would put some language in there that says Aquatechnics does it, because they want to keep it to themselves.
Well, no, I mean, I'm not going to tell you but I think it's possible to apply for a shoreline permit exemption, specifying what methods you're going to use for the IAVMP. I don't think you necessarily have to specify a contractor who's going to do it. They have to know the contractor, and the contractor has to stay the same year after year? Is that what you think?
I do not know.
And what it would be is it has to be a contractor, a licensed herbicide applicator in the state. Typically, that's the legal requirement that they would be requiring, not necessarily whether it's Tom, Dick, or Harry, but that or always Tom, but that it will be a licensed applicator of the state that will do treat this specific area.
If you walk away from here with questions on permits, will you just email me? Let me know. I don't want you to go away without your questions answered. I think that's it. Thank you so much for coming out on this now beautiful evening. And thank you, Rob, for